Thank you for joining the May meeting of the Southern Nevada Strong Steering Committee. Madam Chairwoman, staff is ready for you to begin the meeting.
Thank you, Maren, and good afternoon. I'm Chairwoman Deborah March for the record, and I'm getting a lot of feedback here. I'd like to call the meeting to order, the meeting of May 28, 2020 for Southern Nevada Strong Steering Committee. The RTC staff will begin with a roll call of committee members, introduce staff on the line, and also touch on a few housekeeping items. I'd also like to add that the RTC encourages public participation. You can submit comments at any time before the end of the meeting to the RTC to be read into the record at public comments at rtcsnv.com. Maren?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Maren Dubois, Management Analyst for the RTC, for the record. I will be calling your name in alphabetical order. Please confirm your attendance as I read your name. Shane Ammerman. Nancy Amundsen.
Here.
Nicole Bungham.
I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Mike Casey.
Here.
Lisa Corrado.
Hello, I'm here.
Jocelyn Cousins.
Hello, I'm here.
Robert Fielden.
I'm here.
Sean Gerstenberger.
I'm here.
Brian Knudsen.
I am here.
Jared Lake. Or Luke, sorry, Jared Luke. Can't read my own writing. Deborah March.
Here.
MJ Maynard. Michael Mays.
Here.
Doa Mead.
Here.
Deborah Reyes.
Here.
Sandra Rosenberg.
Here.
Robert Summerfield.
Here.
And did Ted join the line yet? He was trying. We'll watch for him and confirm when he gets on. Craig wanted to make a little comment before I did my housekeeping. So Craig, would you like to jump on?
Right. Yes. Thanks, Maren and Madam Chair. This is Craig Rayborn, Director of the MPO, just for the record. I just wanted to welcome Councilmember Knudsen to his first steering committee meeting. He is the liaison from the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition and was appointed, I think, in January. Wasn't able to attend the meeting, so this is his first meeting attending, and I just wanted to make sure that that we welcome him. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Craig. Look forward to working with you all.
All right. Please note that we have several RTC staff on the line for today's meeting as well. This includes Mr. Craig Rayborn, Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, who we just heard from, Ms. Ray Lathrop, Manager of Regional Planning, Ms. Michelle Laramie, Senior Regional Planner, Mr. Paul Gully, Management Analyst, and finally, Ms. Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor, who will be reading public comments. As the Chairwoman mentioned, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, please state your name for the record before speaking. Be sure to mute your line if you are not speaking, but please note the staff will monitor lines and mute any callers with background noise. Voting will be done verbally as a group, calling for ayes and nays. If there are no nays or abstentions, then the motion will carry. If there are nays, then a roll call vote will be required. In the event of a roll call vote, please wait for your name to be read to provide your vote. The chairwoman will call for any comments or questions after an item has been presented. And finally, staff encourages participation from committee members. There's a raise your hand feature and chat on the WebEx to allow you to let staff know that you have a question or comment. Please note that the chat feature will be shared with the viewing public as well as those connected via WebEx. You can also unmute yourself as needed. We just ask that you return to mute when you are done speaking to minimize the amount of background noise. Thank you to the members for your participation in today's meeting. Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for your participation today. And thank you, Maren. Mr. Rayburn?
Thank you, Chairwoman March and members of the committee. Craig Rayburn, Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, for the record. The first item on the agenda is to conduct your first citizens participation period. As you know, on March 22nd, 2020, the State of Nevada Executive Department issued Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, which suspended the requirement to have a physical location for public meetings. Pursuant to Directive 006 and for the health and safety of the community, this meeting is being held telephonically. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at publiccomments@rtcsnv.com. So again, that's publiccomments@rtcsnv.com. Comments can be submitted to be read aloud or to be added directly to the written record. Ms. Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor for the RTC, will read the public comments received by the RTC. Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Craig. And this is the first time set aside for public comment. This time is limited to comments on items that are included in the agenda. Comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any public comments?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Eileen Pastor, RTC Government Affairs Supervisor, for the record. We do have one public comment related to agenda item number 2. Your first comment is from Taj Amley from the Sierra Club of Southern Nevada. Dear committee members, on behalf of the Sierra Club Southern Nevada Group, I thank you for the opportunity to observe the committee proceedings today and submit the following 2 comments to be read on the record as part of the record for this meeting. Regarding agenda item number 2, the minutes of the January 30, 2020 Steering Committee meeting do not include the name of one of our representatives who was present in person as an interested party. We request that her name be added to the minutes. She is Jasmine Vazin, Clean Transportation for All campaign of the Sierra Club. Regarding agenda item number 4, we see that the first 2 of the 4 SNS plan themes will be addressed by Mr. Rayburn in his report, but not the third one, increased transportation choice. Within his proposed framework for prioritizing activities amid the pandemic reality, we respectfully submit that high priority be given to expanding multimodal transportation, including walkable communities, bike lanes, dedicated bike paths, and bike accessible transit, environmentally conscious local, regional, and intercity buses, and rail, including transit, commuter, and intercity. In addition, we support incentives for expanded consumer access to electric vehicles, to cleaner, more fuel-efficient vehicles, and to cleaner fuel. Thank you for your time and consideration. Madam Chairwoman, that concludes the public comments received.
Thank you, Eileen. Mr. Rayburn?
Thank you, Chairwoman March. Craig Rayburn for the record. The next item is to approve minutes of the January 30th, 2020 SNS Steering Committee meeting. And as we do so, I would recommend that we make the inclusion that that the public comment identified.
Okay, we have, are there any comments or questions that anyone wants to make with regards to the minutes? And we'll look at including that name. Seeing no comments or questions, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
This is Fielden, and I would move for that motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Please, motion in favor by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
No, no one opposed, so that motion carries. Mr. Rayburn?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, Craig Rayborn for the record. The next item, item 3, is to receive a presentation on the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan's vision related to the economic recovery efforts that could be applicable in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to give a presentation to the SNRPC board meeting on May 7th about Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan as it relates to economic recovery. As you all know and are experiencing, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the global and the local economies, our transportation infrastructure systems, and has changed life as we know it, at least temporarily. So today for the steering committee, I will run through most of that presentation. Now, what I'm seeing on my screen is an old slide. Have we been advancing the slides? Okay, thank you. So today for the steering committee, I'll run through most of that presentation, and I'll apologize to the few here who also watched that meeting. And I will also discuss some of the MPO regional planning team's potential related planning activities as a result of this. So next slide, please. So I think most people at this meeting already know the fundamentals of the SNS plan as a steering committee. So I'm just going to briefly remind us about some of the most relevant elements. And first, I want to emphasize that the role and function of a plan like Southern Nevada Strong is to identify recommendations for long-term outcomes. It isn't built to make recommendations about immediate needs, for the next 6, 12, or even 18 months. Instead, it's intended to, look over the horizon at actions that can be taken over the next 2 or 3, all the way out to 20 or more years, so that the region becomes stronger and more resilient to shocks and crises like what we're now facing. Second, I just want to note that SNS was built in very large part to guide a long-term recovery for Southern Nevada from the last economic crisis. The top issues in a 2013 poll for the Southern Nevada Strong Project were jobs, economy, and schools. And others like land use, housing, and transportation. They were also important, but they were listed as secondary priorities. And so those 3 sort of became the long-term recovery focused issues that the SNS plan concentrated on. Third, just Southern Nevada Strong reflected very broad community and stakeholder involvement. Engagement was a huge part of developing the Southern Nevada Strong plan. In fact, the participants in the plan won a National Planning Award for engagement, and that's a pretty good indication of success. The APA gives out one of those a year, and APA, American Planning Association, gives out one of those a year. So it was acknowledged as having significant and very successful public engagement. Also, just to note, groups and task forces represented stakeholders and experts from the entire community, and they looked at things like economic development, housing, education, equity, transportation, environment, public health, and many other topics. So what all this means is that the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan reflects exactly what Southern Nevadans said they wanted and needed in the recovery and aftermath of the Great Recession, which is probably a fairly good analog to what we'll soon be facing. And then finally, the Southern Nevada Strong Plan envisioned a wide distribution of roles for the stakeholders to implement the recommendations. The RTC agreed in 2015 to administer the plan, to promote it, to logically build on it, and to help build the capacity for others to implement it. Most of the recommendations, however, have different stakeholder, frequently local governments or other institutions, actually leading the implementation. Next slide, please. So the pieces of the Southern Nevada Strong Plan fit together very well to build that strength and resilience that the region was looking for. Regional planners like me think about the region as a system that really consists of three main parts: the people and their needs, the economy and its needs, and then the infrastructure, the resources, the transportation system, the environment that help support the people and the economy. When those three elements and all the things that make them work are strong and supportive of each other, then the region is too. So the main themes from Southern Nevada Strong each address all of those elements. As I noted earlier, you guys all know the basic fundamentals, so I'm not going into detail again. But just as an example, for how the plan put together and how the plan elements pull together and address all the pieces of the region, the increased transportation choice theme is obviously related to infrastructure, but it includes recommendations related to making the region more attractive to future businesses, improving roads and public transit to make travel easier for residents and visitors, and more direct linking of transportation projects to economic development. So next slide, I guess. So what I'm going to do now is highlight how the plan translated those themes into recommendations and then eventually outcomes. And I'm just going to note too, to acknowledge the public comment that we received. These are not intended to reflect any kind of a prioritization from the RTC or the MPO planning team. These are merely meant to show examples. With about 350 specific recommendations in the plan, there's obviously not enough time to go through all of them. So I'm really just trying to discuss a few today. And they're really, the ones I chose were mostly to highlight, like the range of topics and how they might apply in today's context, as well as to give a sense for all the relevant issues that are touched on by the SNS plan. So the plan's implementation strategy is set up in a fairly typical format with an overarching set of themes and then goals for each theme. And you can see those goals here for one of those themes. And then under each one of those goals, then there are multiple objectives. And then under each of those objectives, there are multiple recommendations for how to achieve those objectives and goals, and therefore address those themes. So theme one, improving economic competitiveness in education. Let's see here. So so this theme, it recognizes that economic growth is inextricably linked to human capital, skills, education, and then the connections of the workforce in the region. And there are plenty of other documents that also recognize these functions in this human capital. And so the SNS document references those throughout and is intended to be coordinated with those. So the first one I'm going to talk about is objective. Well, the first example I'm going to discuss is just about investing and maintaining infrastructure to meet the needs of a diversified economy. So objective 1.1, so it would be under goal 1, is to invest and maintain infrastructure that meets the needs of a diversified economy. And within that, then there's a description of a specific, and I'm just choosing one as an example. There are literally 350 plus of these, but I'm choosing one just as an example. So objective 1.1.1, good place to start, I suppose, includes assessing the need for and implementing infrastructure that can support a diversified economy, and then recommending updates to land use and transportation plans. So the lead agency for that one that was identified during the planning process is the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. And then other participants would be all of the local governments, and then the RTC, the ones that do the land use and the transportation planning. the plan is structured so that there's a fiscal impact that's identified for each of these. And so that particular implementation activity has a minimal fiscal impact. The time frame for that would be over a period of 3 to 6 years. And then, just as examples of the kinds of things that touches on are the West Henderson interchanges that RTC has been discussing with the city of Henderson, for example. So they're not something that is implemented in the very near term of an economic recovery, but they have been identified as a need for the region and for Henderson's economic development. Another objective relates to using existing building supply so that startups and small businesses can help revitalize existing areas. And so objective under this theme, again, objective 3.1, so it would be under the third goal of emboldening small businesses to participate in revitalization. That objective is to determine the building and space needs for entrepreneurs and startups to embolden existing small businesses to participate in the revitalization. And then a specific implementation activity is identifying neighborhoods that are well positioned to attract businesses from specific sectors and develop place-based strategies, cluster training, and workforce outreach efforts around those areas to reduce commute times and connect local residents to job opportunities. And then for this one, the lead agencies would be local governments. Other participants would be the LVGEA, and then DETR from the state, the Department of Education, Training, and Resources. The fiscal impact for this one was identified as low, and it was also identified as having a 3 to 6 year time frame, so to be implemented over a period of time. And this was really developed to support, or intended to support, the development of locally focused small businesses that will need to be an important part of the region's recovery. So recognizing these considerations can help the region make decisions in the near-term recovery process that will reinforce these longer-term outcomes. And there are other recommendations that in this theme, for example, that address local businesses, small businesses, workforce development, primary through higher education, commercial activities, property rehabilitation, and many, many more interests. So there's a lot that is covered in these. So theme 2 was to invest in complete communities. And again, just emphasizing, I'm showing examples. I'm not trying to do any kind of prioritization by doing this. But the complete communities elements identified strategies to attract housing that meets the needs and desires of a variety of workers and considers how environmental quality, resource availability, and access to necessary services establishes quality of life and economic success for the region. So this is an objective, really. The first example I'll give is just an objective to develop housing and employment in mixed-use neighborhoods near job centers, schools, and other services. And so the specific example in there is one, I was going to joke, like everyone has their implementation matrix out and is flipping through it, and I can point you directly to it, but I know most people don't have that. But the objective 1.2.1 is to develop regional goals and standards that aim to reduce transportation costs and provide increased mobility in neighborhoods to everyday amenities such as grocery stores, offices, and schools. That would be one that the RTC, in its transportation planning agency role, would be the lead on, and then the other participants and stakeholders would primarily consist of the local governments. The developing goals and standards itself would have a minimal fiscal impact, would also have this kind of 3 to 6 year time frame. I don't know if there's really a comment or an example necessary for this one. I think it's pretty well established that transportation costs make up a substantial part of most household expenses, and that proportion for lower income households is usually greater than for higher income ones. So anything that can be done in the near term, like RTC's current fare collection policy with the rear door entry, is important and helpful. But planning now to better facilitate this type of recommendation as we move into the future will result in in housing options that also have lower transportation costs, and sort of more permanent, established lower transportation costs for residents, and therefore give them a stronger ability to withstand economic shocks and stresses. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, I just want to emphasize that I'm just trying to provide examples, and I'll talk more about like how we'll use some of those with you in one of my upcoming slides. But the RTC's regional planning activities at this moment are intended to make us a resource for the stakeholders that are implementing or continuing to prepare and implement their plans or their parts of the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan. So these activities include, doing or starting to prepare, adapting our work program. So we want to adapt the program to make the projects have increasing relevance to some of the unanticipated needs that we're going to face. For example, the Human Services Coordinated Plan, are looking at how sustainability plans or regional sustainability plans are developed. The housing needs assessment, the extreme heats events and coordinated plan, all of those have elements to them that could be particularly relevant as we're talking about sort of short-term, mid-term, and even long-term ways to address the COVID crisis and recovery period that we're going to be going into. The next one would be increasing flexibility. SNS presents a broad vision, but it also had a lot of flexibility in the strategies and the tactics. So, the plan itself is not a mandate. And it is really important to remember that the implementation can be flexible based on current needs and capabilities. And I also want to point out too, as we think about how to increase flexibility in the plan, that the early and middle days of a crisis are not usually the time to start thinking about major changes to a long-range plan, but they can be a really good time to learn about what priorities are and start thinking about how to go about updating that plan. Another one I'll point out is we want to start encouraging people to take this opportunity that's presented. Soon it's going to be time to ask a question we don't usually ask, which is, what don't we want to go back to normal as we go into the recovery? And then, we at the RTC and the MPO will try to, work with you to help figure out the ways that you can kind of reboot activities in a way that keeps the things you want, but reduces or kind of shaves away the things that you don't. We'll continue to provide technical assistance, our help with engagement, asking questions that matter to people, etc. And then something that we're going to start working on more is trying to measure things that matter. We want to focus efforts not so much on scoring whether or not our partners in Southern Nevada Strong have been implementing the plan, but instead focus on measuring and tracking the outcomes that the plan was trying to achieve and identifying the gaps that still need to be addressed. And then another activity that that isn't on this slide, but I'll talk about it in a sec, is but that I emphasize to the SNRPC board is prioritization. Prioritizing the recommendations that are in the plan and how you as the stakeholders want to implement it is always an important part of making a regional plan useful and relevant. So what's on this slide, what you see here is a framework that a number of my colleagues at other MPOs and COGs have been discussing as a way to evaluate and reprioritize both their current work programs and their agency planned long-range activities, but also that they're working with their stakeholders to apply as well. So it outlines a conceptually simple process, but in reality, we think it will probably be fairly difficult to adapt. But but it defines, five categories for activities and to sort of place your activities into. And it could be activities or recommendations or work program activities or work program items, but whatever type of activity that you might need to start prioritizing in a time like this. So as I go through these categories, and I'm not trying to do this process today, I'm trying to identify what the process might look like. But as I go through these categories, I'd also like to ask that each of you kind of think about how they might fit into your individual context. And this could actually be part of what we discuss in an agenda item as we get closer to the end of the meeting. So the first thing that this chart does is it asks people who are using it to sort of identify their guiding question, their overarching mission or priority, or rather they're like they refer to it here, as you can see, as a line of sight. And then after that's done, then basically all of the different activities that may be in a work program or activity go into one of these five categories in the boxes that you see below. So the first one then is current priority, the things that are still relevant and that will continue forward, even though they may have a modified approach. The second one are the things that they propose. Let's go back. Yeah, thanks. Are the things that they propose to pause and then resume when the crisis is over. And so in this instance, they think we're probably talking about 6 to 18. They think most places are talking about 6 to 18 month delays, but there's a lot of uncertainty with that. Then the third category are the emerging priorities or the existing but newly prioritized. So things that they may have thought that they would do when they got to it, but it turns out that those have become more important. Or it could be things that they've just learned about and now they're important. And they're trying to figure out how to fit those in as well. And then there are going to be some that are kind of unknown. They don't know exactly what to do with them. They're either unclear, or the conditions are too much in flux for them to really make a decision. And so they need to wait for things to settle down before they can kind of figure out what to do with those. And then the last one, and frankly, this is the toughest one, are those priorities that they've decided to honor and let go. The things that they're going to say are just not going to happen. Conditions essentially make them impossible. It could be resources. It could just be changing conditions of another type. But those are, like I said, those are probably the toughest ones to process. So let's go to the next slide. So this slide shows an example for how one nonprofit, and I think it's one from around the Washington D.C. area, applied this framework to their work program. And I'm not recommending that this is the only approach that can work, but it seems like a good structure, at least among the other regional planning entities. I've been hearing a fair amount of, when I say other regional, across the nation, I've been hearing a fair amount of interest from them in using it and applying it to their needs. So for this group, what I would like to say, and I guess offer, is that the MPO planning team, like I said, we're here to support you as much as possible. And as you know, we're also constrained by budget and resources and rules about eligible activities and so on. But we really do think that trying to coordinate and collaborate as much as possible on SNS implementation, continuing, as well as on other things that are related to that, will almost always lead to the best long-term outcomes. So what I kind of loosely am proposing is a process where we would work with each of you to go through the Southern Nevada Strong Plan's implementation matrix and apply this framework like this agency did. It would be on a larger scale for us probably, but apply this framework to the action items where your organization or agency is listed as the lead agency or as a supporting agency. And of course, if anyone wanted to do this on their own, that would be fine too, but I think we'll try to help. And then once that process is completed, and admittedly, that could take a few months and iterations, because we all know, first, everyone's really busy right now, but also, because the impacts and external conditions are still pretty fluid. But after we've worked with everyone on that, we would review and then see where the areas of consistency and agreement are, basically identifying the plurality of priorities for the region. And so, and also I'll just note, if any of you are interested in trying to do that exercise as like an internal effort as well, we would be happy to help you with that too. So not just for the Southern Nevada Strong Plan, but part of the capacity building role that the RTC has as the core administrator, we can help with that too. Yeah, so the MPO team would, we'll work with any of you to identify the recommendations that are most important to you, and then start trying to develop that strategy to implement them. But I do want to really emphasize that the RTC's activities as administrator of the regional plan are not decided in a vacuum and will not be decided and taken in a vacuum. The success of the Southern Nevada Strong Plan is and will continue to be that it is a community and a regional effort that has substantial and ongoing dialogue between all of the stakeholders. And that's part of what's so exciting about presenting this to the committee today. So next and final slide for this presentation. Thanks. So that concludes the presentation. So I just want to thank everyone again and look forward to trying to address the region's current and future needs. And I'm happy to answer any questions and discuss any of the stuff I just put out there.
Thank you, Craig. And are there any questions or comments from the committee with regards to Craig's presentation here?
Mayor,
go ahead. Lisa?
Hi, Mayor, it's Lisa. And I don't know if, Craig, you're looking for more discussion on a subsequent agenda item, but since we've jumped into this, I think the chapter we really need to focus on is on capacity building. And I know Councilman Knudsen is on, and he has done a lot of research in this area. And I think there may be efforts already underway to address this, but I know that this agenda item is about the economic recovery, but how is SNS in a position, I guess, is SNS in a position to do some of that capacity building to get access to funds, to better distribute them, to be more competitive, whether it's for social services programs or economic recovery?
So Lisa, sorry, this is Craig again. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we are interested in doing that capacity building. I don't know. I think maybe it's worth having a discussion as to like how coordination of activities can best happen. I think it's really important that as we think about that issue, that it be a truly coordinated kind of effort, so that we're all sort of pulling with each other instead of individual agencies and stakeholders, potentially going into competition. That's really, frankly, the biggest concern I have. We used to talk in the context of I think you were leaning towards about sort of grant applications and trying to locate and identify resources. But yeah, I mean, we have obviously we'll participate and help in any way we can.
I think that may be a role. If it's hard to say if this is an appropriate time to discuss it because I can't read y'all's body language, but I'm just thinking that we're looking in terms of our recovery structure. A lot of us both at the regional level and then at the city levels are working on recovery planning, and one of the functions in that framework that is established by FEMA is capacity building. And so we're already talking about doing trainings with our nonprofit organizations and getting like UNLV Public Health involved to help with some of that. And I think, the more that we think about it, the more that it seems like a role that SNS might be able to play.
Yeah, I don't really have any qualms about anything like that. I think that is a good role to play. I just, and we've done capacity building trainings in the past and we'll absolutely and participate in those. So I think we need to figure out exactly what they look like and what that process would be as we move forward. But I think we're happy to try to find the ways to do that.
That maybe there's some things that we can look at that are appropriate for how we design our roadways to make sure that we're more sensitive to the needs of the public. I recently read an article, for example, about making sure that our trails and our bike trails are wide enough to ensure social distancing, because things are changing now. So the way we'll be looking at things will be very different than maybe they were historically. So there may be an opportunity for us to look at how we can support training, and instead of each municipality going down a different track, maybe we can do some things to provide some coordination.
Yeah, that's a really, really good idea, Mayor. We've been paying a pretty significant amount of attention to some of the developments that have been happening with other cities and regions across the country, as they've been trying to find the ways to, for lack of a better way, sort of adapt their transportation systems, particularly their sidewalks and roadway space, like you were saying, sort of adapt them on the fly to the changing conditions that we've been dealing with, and they've been dealing with. And so, I think there's certainly some interest in that. So that's one that also kind of crosses over both regional planning and MPO, typical MPO role as well. So that's definitely something that that we would be interested in trying to figure out how to maybe set together some discussions and some trainings on those.
Chair March, this is Brian Knudsen. One of the thoughts I had is with regards to the role of the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition, the SNRPC. Obviously, still there's still somewhat some confusion around the role of the SNRPC. I see a lot of value. One of the discussions we had at our last meeting, just this last week, was looking at where there are gaps in infrastructure throughout the valley and leveraging federal funding to move forward. So the gap that was presented that I think is of use right now in particular is the expansion of 5G network or the cables throughout the valley to allow for telehealth and distance learning. It's those kinds of issues, projects of regional significance that don't have any real lead agencies right now, but will add a lot of value to the efforts of one, I think, of our economic developments plan through the Economic Alliance, but also through the Southern Nevada Strong Plan. So it's my goal that we can move in that direction with the SNRPC and closely work with Southern Nevada Strong too.
Councilman Craig Rayborn, just so you know, if there are things that you would like us to help with in that, let us know, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Rayburn?
Thanks. So are we moving to the next item, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the next item then is to receive an update on the regional work program. The regional planning function of the RTC, which administers the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan, moved into the MPO department of the RTC last year. And with this transition, it was necessary for us to develop that regional planning work program that will guide the staff in the administration of the regional plan. So staff's going to give an update on progress within those tasks, and then following the presentation, we'll have a discussion around the timing and the need to create technical advisory committee or advisory groups for each of the research projects that we're going to discuss. So Ms. Ray Lathrop, Manager of Regional Planning for the RTC, will start the presentation.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Just really quickly, at the January Steering Committee, we presented an update to the Unified Planning Work Program that included 2 tasks related to administration of the regional plan. And so we'll give a quick report here on some of the progress being made on those tasks. They were adopted by and approved by the RTC board in February, and then finally approved in April for us to start working. So our team has been working very diligently over the last 2 months on some new activities that we wanted to make sure you guys saw. So we can go to the next slide. These 2 new tasks, the first one is Regional Policy Plan Administration, which includes just general role of having an office and managing a website and providing the assistance that we provide. And then regional planning updates, indicator tracking and mapping, the Community Planning Academy, general outreach, and an annual report. Today, we're going to update you on 2 of these tasks included here, and some work that we've done recently. So if we can go to the next slide, and we can go to the next one. Perfect. So one of the things that we worked on over the last few weeks, if you recall, we published a community engagement toolkit. This is one of the things that we see our role in providing some assistance is creating templates and tools for our partners to implement pieces of the plan. Because community engagement was such a large piece of the planning process, and it is a high priority of continuing engagement and continuing to stay on top of best practices within public engagement, we created this toolkit over the course of 2017 and 2018. And then earlier this year, we actually looked at the toolkit and wanted to make some technical updates to the map that's included that shows the geographic distribution of our community. So where can you find a lot of communities in need, or look through a map and see what kind of people live in what neighborhoods. So if you click on the next slide, just in case you don't know where this is on our website, this is a screenshot here. One of the things that we wanted to make sure to do over the last couple of weeks is actually update all of the pieces of the toolkit to be relevant to our new digital and virtual reality. Within each of the tools listed on this page, we've included new suggestions and recommendations and tactics on engaging with the public online. And we thought that that was something really important to be useful in your work moving forward. Obviously, everyone's work has really been changed over the last couple of weeks. And so we wanted to make sure that the tools we had are still relevant to everyone's work. If you can go to the next slide. So specifically, we actually found a number of resources that are very particular and specific to today's environment. And we would definitely suggest that you guys look at these if you are planning large events or trying to react to amending the planning process of any of your ongoing projects. A number of you in the survey that we just recently collected indicated that you're still working on a lot of the activities that you had committed to prior to the pandemic. And so here's some tools that we think will be able to help that work. All right, and another piece of the general plan administration was regional plan updates. And under that task, our team is focused on revisiting the opportunity site strategies that were published at the same time as the entire Southern Nevada Strong Plan. We have focused on updating the downtown North Las Vegas opportunity site strategy for the last few months. And I'm going to kick it over to Michelle Laramie to give you an update on this report.
Thank you, Ray. So Michelle Laramie for the record. And I think you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So as Ray mentioned, we are working on updating the opportunity site plans, and specifically we've been working with downtown North Las Vegas on their opportunity site. And we're now nearly finished with our update with downtown North Las Vegas. We're in the last phase with them. So previously we shared this high-level overview of our methodology for the project. And we worked with each of the jurisdictions to kind of determine some deliverables. So as you can see, the majority of the process was designed so that there's some consistency across all the plans, and that we have some standard deliverables. However, knowing that each jurisdiction has their own specific revitalization strategies and goals, we also built out some site-specific deliverables for each project as well. And so those site-specific deliverables that we've been working on with North Las Vegas are listed on the slide in blue. Next slide, please. So we've been working to finalize the 5-year progress report for downtown North Las Vegas. We've actually submitted our final draft to them, and so we're just waiting for final comments before we finish and publish that copy. So our research consisted of a literature review of past planning efforts, existing conditions analysis. We conducted some stakeholder interviews, and we also met regularly with the city of North Las Vegas to just really understand everything that has been happening and going on over the past 5 years and beyond. And we took all of this information to inform our assessment of the planning progress and our findings for the report. So I'm just going to give you a quick high-level overview of what's in the report. You can go to the next slide. So in our first section, we kind of set the vision for the site. Here we worked through some of the past literature review and kind of consolidated all of the visionary elements for downtown North Las Vegas, and worked with North Las Vegas to put together this conceptual district map of different areas of focus that could start to emerge in the downtown area. And so we've since put this into GIS, and this will be a product that we can kind of hand off to the city to utilize for their future planning efforts. And we've also provided some other examples of what other communities are doing in this section that can really start to help kind of market and communicate that overall vision for their site. Next slide. We then go into kind of the progress section of this report, and this is where we specifically start to assess the individual strategies. And we used a rating system here of complete, on track, not started, or no longer relevant. And most of those, I think, are pretty obvious, but the no longer relevant category was given to strategies that had been explored previously, but maybe weren't feasible to implement or are considered outdated at this time. So no longer relevant just means that it's not currently being pursued, but it doesn't mean that it can't be pursued again or come back if the current conditions change. And then you can see that we have a text summary that kind of details our findings and why we gave each of these strategies that particular rating. Next slide. Our recommendations section provides an updated action and strategy framework for continuing the work on the opportunity sites. So here we list the original strategy. In the middle column, we have the updated strategy, which is very similar, just kind of reflects some of the progress that has been made. And then in the last column, we detail specific recommendations that are ideas, programs, projects that have come up in our review and in our conversations with the city that maybe are specific ways in which the strategies can be implemented through partnerships and through the city's programs and policies. Next slide. And then lastly, we did do some deep dives into some case study research around specific challenges that continue to remain in downtown North Las Vegas. And so I'm not going to go into detail here just for the sake of time. But we did, specifically look into case studies that showcase projects, programs, or policies that could help provide some insight and some more examples into how other communities are tackling similar issues and goals in their communities that downtown North Las Vegas has for their community. So we anticipate getting feedback next month, and then once we have a final report to share, we'll go kind of share a more detailed report on what that final product looks like, and of course share the published report with you as well. And that's all I have on downtown North Las Vegas. Back to Ray.
Great, thank you. Next slide. Now we'll be providing an update on our second task and several of the projects that we have started since April. I encourage any of you to provide any questions or possible volunteerism into the chat box here as we kind of go through these research projects, because I think some of you might find some of these particularly relevant to the work that you also are undergoing at this time. So these distinct projects were identified through several conversations and outreach and meetings that we had with all of our partners. We felt like there was some momentum around these issues, and we defined some research questions that our team will be working on over the next year. So first, we'll talk about the Future Housing Inventory and Needs Study, which is really looking at the forward supply and demand of our regional housing supply. We're collecting and looking at a lot of historic and forecast data, including employment and population, zoning and land use plans, and affordability and production, in order to estimate some of our future needs. In addition to this data, we're also really kind of trying to learn how other communities follow specific methodology in estimating this future need and supply. So Paul will actually share more about this project here. Paul, are you there?
Oh, yes, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Ray. Paul Gully for the record. And I guess before I jump into all of this, I do want to note that, so I'm going to be providing a lot of background and an overview of this project as it was initially conceived, kind of pre-pandemic, and going over some of our initial work. But obviously the pandemic changes things a little bit. For some of like the forecasts that we're using, we know that they are likely to change at least to some degree. And we know, we've heard from you that some of your kind of near-term housing priorities have definitely changed and are focused more on meeting immediate needs. So, well, I'm going to go over kind of the preliminary work we've done. We definitely have the ability to kind of be flexible and refocus some of our project goals and research based on current needs. But initially, we, as Ray just mentioned, kind of set out to identify whether we as a region could expect to see a surplus or a shortage in housing units over the next few decades. And obviously, whether we have a shortage or a surplus in housing has implications on the region's housing affordability, as well as a handful of other important quality of life factors. And we were also planning to look at housing preference surveys and affordability to attempt to put together some baseline estimates around needed housing types and price points, kind of replicating some work that other regions have done. And so we were still kind of in the data collection phase, taking a look at trends and relationships, and then also reaching out to experts to better understand how regions have done similar types of analysis. Next slide. And so this is just kind of an example of some of the data that we pulled together and started looking at. So this graph doesn't necessarily tell a complete story in and of itself, but it does begin to paint a bit of a picture. The chart includes population, which is the orange line, and permitted housing units, which are the blue bars. And you can see housing permits kind of tracked fairly closely with population from 1980 up through roughly 2006 or 7. But the permits really fall off, as you might expect, as we hit the Great Recession, though our population continued to grow pretty steadily. And while housing permits don't necessarily equal new housing production for that year, the implications of this chart, I think, are pretty clear. But this type of analysis traditionally has really hinged on the jobs housing ratio. And the jobs housing ratio is really total employment divided by total housing units. And it's kind of a common framework planners use to identify whether a region has a healthy supply of housing and jobs that are able to kind of meet the needs of their residents. So if a jobs housing ratio is too high, that might mean that adequate housing is unaffordable to workers in the area. You might get increased traffic congestion and poor air quality and increased inequality. Conversely, if a jobs housing ratio is too low, this might indicate that there's inadequate job availability for area residents. And while housing might be cheap, people may struggle to pay for it or to maintain their housing. And so this is the jobs housing ratio for our region since 2010. You can see it's steadily increased for most of the past decade. And these are preliminary numbers. We're still waiting on some updated data that may change the numbers slightly. But again, determining whether we can expect to see a shortage or a surplus in housing really is dependent on the ratio that we're measuring against. And the general rule of thumb is you want to be somewhere around 1.5 to 1. Although other cities have established targets specific to their local conditions and local goals. Now, this rule of thumb is obviously pre-pandemic, and if things like widespread telecommuting become kind of the norm, that may change things a bit. But I think it's still too likely to too early to know at this point what those changes might be. But looking at other regions and the targets they've established, the Sacramento region established a target of 1.4 to 1. San Diego similarly was at 1.41 to 1. The DC region established a target of 1.54 to 1. So, we as a region haven't established a regional target yet. And while the difference between 1.5 to 1 and 1.4 to 1 or 1.25 to 1 might seem fairly small, those differences really make an impact on an assessment like this a fair amount.
I have a question for you. In these numbers, are you looking at single family, multifamily, rental, ownership, all types of housing participation?
Yes, so total number of housing units.
Okay, because I know that during like the 8, 9, 10 period, a lot of those houses were rental properties that then have become absorbed. And I think that's why a lot of the developers have not built as many housing units, because a lot of those units are now being absorbed by buyers. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Paul, this is Lisa. I think in most communities, the goal is to have a 1-to-1 ratio for every working person or person who's eligible and able to work, there should be a job for them.
So there are, certain cities have kind of set that 1-to-1 target. And in a lot of the research, we found that, there are a lot of ranges that kind of come up. A lot of them did center around 1.5 to 1, but we did see that there were some that kind of set the 1-to-1 as their ratio or their benchmark. And we can go to the next slide. And this graph really is meant to kind of highlight the impact that a jobs housing ratio has on an assessment like this. Don't pay too much attention to the numbers. I think it might be more helpful to look at it in the abstract. So that thick black line shows the historical and forecast housing units for our region from 2009 out to 2040. And the thin blue line shows what the region's needed housing units would be based on a 1.5 to 1 jobs housing ratio. And then the green thin line represents needed housing using a 1.25 to 1 jobs to housing ratio. And if you can click the next slide, you can really kind of see the impact it has. So the shaded red area here is showing a shortage in housing units from 2016 out to 2025 if we were to use that 1.5 to 1 ratio. If you click again, it shows the shortage if we were using 1.25 to 1 as a target ratio. You can click again. So yeah, this is definitely something that when we were digging into this project, that was a question that came up fairly early, and is something that might be useful to help talk about with a technical advisory committee or group. And as Ray mentioned, the jobs housing ratio and the shortage or surplus was part of the analysis, but we also were hoping to look at preference surveys to get a better sense of potential housing types and demand in the future, as well as affordability more generally. But as I mentioned at the top, we are definitely can be responsive and flexible to any more current and pressing priorities if need be.
Yeah. Oh, this is Ray again. There's a lot of echo. We send out a survey regarding priorities that people are looking into for any given issue, and housing shows up in within your own results within the topics of economy and health and social services. And so housing is something that's really important right now. And obviously there's so many different concerns and challenges within housing. But we hope that we can create a technical advisory group for this research project, and then maybe use some of the data that we already have received or collected to maybe answer some shorter term questions if possible. So we will be getting a note out to everyone on the steering committee regarding the formation of technical advisory groups for each one of these research projects that we're presenting today. But think about the housing one very broadly, and we will actually work through the varying components and the timeline for each one of those research questions within the tag as we move forward. So if you're interested in joining, or if housing is a big concern right now, and if you think any of the forecasting or data collection that we've done so far could be helpful to decisions you're trying to make now, please let us know, and we will get you on that list for sure.
Thank you very much, Ray. At this time, I have to step off, and so Nancy is going to take over to chair the rest of the meeting. But please continue the discussion, and I think that this is sounding very interesting and robust. So, Nancy, if you don't mind taking over. Nancy?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you all
Okay,
hear Nancy now? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. And Ray, did you have additional slides?
Yeah, we're going to review the 2 more projects. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we can go to the next slide. So our second project is around our extreme heat and vulnerability study. So I think we all know that Southern Nevada has been identified as one of the fastest warming regions in the country. A lot of our partners were thinking through heat-related vulnerability, health risks, as well as some of the trends towards more extreme heat events. And so we kind of defined this research project to answer a few different questions that we think are still very relevant to some of our short-term concerns during the pandemic, and then also some long-term things. So as the slide shows, this study is looking a little bit at vulnerability. So what are the human conditions that make individuals vulnerable to extreme heat? And what are the threat of the local temperatures? So what about our built environment might make our community even feel warmer or have more heat impact? And then what is our community's response in the end to that projection? So I'm actually going to hand this one back over to Paul, and he'll show you a few preliminary findings as well.
Great, thanks, Ray. Paul Gully again for the record. And I know we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to try and fly through these. But yeah, as Ray just mentioned, our goal for this initial phase of the project was to identify concentrations of people who may be at greater risk during extreme heat events. And I think this is especially important given not only that we're hitting the triple digits, but that this pandemic may be constraining resources in the near term, and kind of the traditional interventions and ways we've gone about heat mitigation here may be impacted by social distancing, the closure of community buildings. I think both the New York Times and LA Times both had stories that highlighted this fact. So I think it's especially timely. But doing this type of heat vulnerability analysis is somewhat common around the country. Other regions and cities have put together some maps and some indexes. And there's a great deal of academic research around extreme heat impacts on people. So we had a lot to draw from, and shout out to our graduate intern, Emily, who's at the School of Public Health at UNLV. She was really helpful in pulling some academic literature and helping us review it. But our initial research and conversations kind of brought us to a point where we understood that, while everyone in Southern Nevada is going to be impacted by extreme heat, there are certain communities that may be impacted at a greater level. If you can click to the next slide. And so we understood that certain communities would be particularly affected based on sensitivity to heat exposure, ability to adapt during extreme heat events, and kind of the level of exposure to extreme heat. And so these are a handful of variables that we pulled together for our initial analysis. We're still kind of working through this, but this is a preliminary list. Next slide. And so to identify indicators for those factors, again, we looked at what other regions had done. We looked at academic studies, and we also consulted with some local experts at the health district, as well as some faculty members at the School of Public Health, who were able to help us better understand local scale factors that we should consider for this type of analysis. And our data modeling team within the MPO has been super helpful in working with us to think about kind of the spatial analysis component needed to help answer our research question. And so this is very preliminary. It is kind of mapping, it's an exposure composite map. So considering surface temperature, vegetated land cover, developed land, and elevation. And so based on this analysis, we preliminarily can expect that populations kind of in the central and eastern portion of the valley to face a greater risk of exposure to extreme heat. And so our hope is to kind of develop composite maps that take into consideration those three factors, sensitivity, exposure, and adaptability, to ultimately feed into an overall extreme heat vulnerability map that'll identify where populations will be most vulnerable during extreme heat events. And so our next steps include continuing to pull data and talk with local experts, and then working with a technical advisory group or committee to help us interpret and validate some of our findings and maps, and maybe more importantly, think through how we can make this actionable.
Thank you, Paul. As you can tell, I mean, there's a lot of very interesting, I think, outcomes as well as implications in this research. We definitely want to include everyone's brainstorm and creativity about how to not only design and process some of this data, but then also what it can be used for. Already, we are thinking about how we can share it with community members that are particularly interested in working with some very specific vulnerable populations like the elderly, or also how some of this mapping and scoring might also impact food deserts, or does it have other nexus with other social needs in our valley? Because we think maybe some of these vulnerability factors might mean other things. The other piece is this might really relate to housing too. And someone's already suggested to us that we think about the health of housing. And so we don't want to lose that conversation either, especially at a time in the summer when people are sheltering in place and might have limited resources for utilities. So we hope to move some of this conversation forward really quickly over the summer, and hope that those of you that are really interested in diving into some of this research would want to be a part of that with us. And we'll go to the next slide. The last project that we're going to talk through is an inventory of regional sustainability planning tools and techniques. Many of you are probably aware that sustainability planning has been kind of at the a topic that has come up a number of times in the last maybe year. There's some conversations about it at the state level, and then of course with all of the jurisdictions. We wanted to provide some help as far as how do communities tackle sustainability planning. And so we talked to a few regions about how they approached it, and Michelle Laramie will give an update on this project now.
Great. Thanks, Ray. So as Ray mentioned, we've been researching different approaches to regional sustainability planning in order to inform discussions should our region decide that we want to approach this kind of work together in the future. And just to reiterate the project, it was born out of some of the recent legislation at the state level, as well as local discussions regarding some of the environmental and climate action policies and plans. And so for the purposes of this project, we've been using the term sustainability or the phrase sustainability planning really be interchangeable with resiliency planning or climate action planning or any of those similar approaches to that type of planning work. So we started by conducting an academic literature review around various methodologies and approaches that other regions have taken to sustainability planning. And we also reached out to 4 peer communities across the country to better understand how they have kind of tackled this type of planning and what some of their on-the-ground experiences have been in this work. So ultimately, we connected with the 4 peer communities that are shown here on this slide. And from this research, we've gleaned a couple of key early findings that we wanted to share with you today and ultimately bring to a technical advisory committee in the near future. So the first thing we found, which isn't really surprising, is that not all communities are really engaged in regional sustainability planning. Regional collaboration around sustainability and resiliency is still somewhat new, and many communities are still strictly kind of looking to local jurisdictions to tackle these issues individually. And while these efforts can see some positive results for sure, the literature also it really showed that there are also many potential problems that can arise when local agencies work on these bigger issues alone. Specifically, many of the elements in sustainability planning have different synergies or trade-offs with one another. And so when agencies are going at this work alone, there's a tendency to end up inadvertently counteracting or negating one another's work. And it can also be extremely difficult to measure and track results at the local level and to create comprehensive mitigation or response plans individually. And in that academic literature review, there were really no examples where regional advancements had been made in mitigating climate change when it was purely done through local jurisdictions operating alone and independently. So instead, the literature did really strongly emphasize the need for regional collaboration around sustainability planning. And so the majority of our research then focused on how that was being done and how other communities have approached regional collaboration. And we found that there's 2 broad approaches. The first is to go ahead and create a kind of a, for lack of a better word, formal regional sustainability plan. This, of course, is a document that guides the goals, strategies, implementation, and evaluation of sustainability practices in the region. And in this approach, the focus is primarily on developing shared goals and committing to achieving these goals through local adoption and implementation of the plan. Benefits can be consensus building around regional sustainability approaches and gaining knowledge about the existing data and learning specific policy strategies or opportunities for mitigating some of the issues that you agree to work on. Drawbacks are that the implementation of the plan is typically voluntary, and that not all local jurisdictions have the same capacity for implementation. So it can be sometimes difficult and challenging to move implementation forward. The second approach we found was that a lot of regions are forming regional climate collaboratives or regional resiliency collaboratives around sustainability and resiliency planning. And in this approach, the focus is really to share knowledge and resources and determine common goals that can guide local sustainability efforts. And really emphasizes building a network and building capacity within the region to work on shared sustainability goals. So in this case, the focus is really on long-term collaboration rather than a development of a formal plan. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a formal plan. It doesn't preclude the collaborative from adopting one, but that's not always the approach that's taken through the collaborative method. And benefits here include improving efficiency through shared resources and staff, also consensus building and broader coordination and implementation across the region. And drawbacks are that administration and funding for the collaborative can be difficult to sustain. And building relationships and consensus building is sometimes difficult work and can take quite a while to work through. Both approaches we found have proved successful for regional sustainability planning, and the peer communities that we interviewed showed that as well. Next slide. So through those interviews, we also learned about some general processes other communities have used to take towards sustainability planning. And this is probably a kind of a second step to this research should we decide to move forward. So here the region shared with us kind of three broad categories in which their work took place: process, foundation, and plan components. And these really refer to the basic steps that are kind of common to creating plans, or working through collaborations, and some of the general components and categories that might be found in each plan, or that may be addressed in the collaborative. However, for our next steps, we've drafted a summary of our findings, which we'd like to share with the Technical Advisory Committee. And this particular committee, we do need to get going pretty quickly, as we're due to finish this research by the end of the fiscal year. So we anticipate a few meetings over the next month or so. And from those meetings, creating some recommendations for what the region would like to do, which approach sustainability planning we might like to take, and then determining if there's a desire for more research, or to look at what a possible next phase for this project might be. So we'll be reaching out very soon to form that technical advisory group and get moving on that.
Thank you, Michelle. We can go to the next slide. This is Ray again. So as you can see or hear, the regional planning team is working really hard and moving a lot of different projects forward over the last 3 months since we last presented in January. We are providing technical support to several of our partners and research. All of this is available to you, and we can continue to analyze it in different ways. We believe, just the way Craig presented earlier, that the regional plan carries such a broad vision for the next 20 years. We could really take all of this work in various ways to help you in your role in that implementation. So we are really excited about kind of this work and our next steps. You can always reach out to us and let us know what kind of questions you're asking and what priorities are emerging for you and your work. Unfortunately, we kind of had to go quickly through some of these projects. So if you're interested in learning more about any of them, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to take any questions if someone has something right now.
So Ray, this is Craig, and Vice Chair Amundsen. This is Craig Rayborn again, just for the record. Just to sort of add to what Ray just said, and then sort of throughout this presentation, just a reminder to everyone that the timing of this was such that our regional work program was adopted by RTC in February.
Yeah.
And what that meant was that by the time we were able to start working on these things, most of the region had sort of already gone into or was starting to go into shutdown, or was a very formal shutdown in some instances. And so it was difficult for us to try to convene new working groups. Most of the planning directors will realize or will remember that I reached out in mid-March, probably, I think it was probably Monday the 16th or so, sort of trying to gauge interest in some discussions about some of these kinds of things. And basically everyone was completely understandably dealing with the really immediate needs and pressures that they had. And so we made the decision to go ahead and start doing as much of the work as we could, and then engage over time. And that's engage over time with the steering committee to form these technical groups to help move these projects forward. And so that's really what we're starting to do now. Yeah. And so we do want to give everyone an opportunity to either comment, but also to express interest and participate in some of the technical work, the technical groups with these, so that we can share in more detail the work that we've been doing and get feedback as far as how to package, structure, present, what to sort of leave off, what else to do that we haven't gotten to. And so it's important to us that we try to get that input. So if we don't hear much during the meeting right now, we'll have to be reaching out individually to be in touch with everybody to try to get that participation.
Yeah. And this is Nancy. I would also recommend anybody that has thoughts after we close this meeting, just reach out to Ray or to Craig, send an email, because a lot of times when we're having these type of virtual meetings, it's not as focused. So as you back away and you think of other things, I would recommend you reach out to both Craig and Ray and ask any questions, provide any input.
Thank you. Yep.
So if there are no other questions or comments, we can move on to the next item.
Great. Yeah, so thank you, Vice Chair Amundson. Craig Rayborn again for the record. So our next item is a standing agenda item that we have to discuss current work activities and priorities relating to the implementation of the regional plan. As I said before, collaboration and coordination are really critical to the implementation of the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan. And so this is typically an item where the partners can share their recent work activities, challenges, opportunities that they may have faced. And then that particularly applies kind of during this this period of crisis. So what we'll do is we're going to present some word cloud type results from the survey that the form that all of you received, the Google form, so share some of those preliminary results, and then just kind of run through these questions and give people an opportunity to comment. But we do want to encourage everyone, if you haven't yet, that Google form is still open, and it's a great way to get that information in there about what your needs are, what your priorities are. And then as we reach out, as we try to follow up, that'll give us a good grounding for how to do that and how to structure that. So I think with that, Ray, I'll turn it over to you to do this.
If you can go to the next slide, this is actually all of the answers to the first few questions that we asked regarding where are your priorities right now. And so it was really kind of framed as a global question. And then if you haven't seen the survey, it asked you, what was your priority within different topics, within the economy and within health and within social services and quality of life concerns. And like I said earlier, housing actually showed up in pretty much every single one of those buckets. So housing is seen as very related to health, very related to the economy, and very related to social services. And so that is why it's rather prominently featured in this word cloud. And so we are willing to look at the housing project that we have proposed and see how it can react or adapt to some of the questions that you guys are asking. And so we want to be nimble, and we want to be relevant to your work and your concerns. So we'll be reaching out to everyone based on those survey results and seeing how those priorities might continue to inform our work and our work program. And then also maybe connect the dots between several of you that might not be working together. So one of the questions in the survey at the end was, who are you really working with on some of these concerns? And so, we see some of our work and our role to just connect the region across several of these issues. And it's very possible that you may not think about working with someone else that might be within our connection and within our steering committee. So stay tuned on some individual reach outs based on this work and how we can support you. The next slide, if you can advance there, we asked two different questions related to your priorities. One, what was your work and your work activity prior to the pandemic that is continuing to be worked on and continuing to be executed? And then also, what is emerging through this time as a priority? So this is stuff that we think people are probably working on, either new or carried over from before. Lots of concern around small and local business. And so I need to do a little bit of work, completely honest, around what the plan says about, our local business and who the partners are, and see how we can maybe get some response there, or at least remember and remind ourselves about what the regional plan says about local and small business. And I think that would be maybe helpful in your work too. And then finally, if you go to the next one, we asked kind of a creative question around some of the opportunities that are coming up. Maybe what are the emerging, or what are the interesting things that are coming through during this time, and also what are some things that we didn't expect. And so, our region has a lot to think through around some of the relationships that we've had in the past and how those can continue or work forward. Are they strengthening? Are they weakening? Telecommuting came up a number of times within these survey results around ways that we are really changing, and also ways that we are being challenged. And so we want to partner with everyone on what we can be doing to help all of you move forward. And like Craig started off in the meeting, the first agenda item around how can the regional plan be implemented and continue to move forward through the change in this environment. And so these are very, very helpful insights for us to know where you're at, and also like what your availability is to work on regional issues and concerns. And we'll be taking these surveys responses and being able to tailor individual outreach, as well as some follow-up items for ourselves and our team. So I don't know if anything came or struck you as interesting, or something that you maybe didn't expect or wanted to elaborate on. We also had posed a couple of questions within this agenda item related to just kind of what resources you might need, and what are your agency's plans to adapt work at this time. And this agenda item is really conceived as a way for us to kind of dialogue about that. But as we're running out of time, if you want to add a comment in the chat section, or if you want to pose another question, we really do want to create a space where we are sharing and supporting everyone here. So with that, I'll leave it and open it up for anyone with a question or a comment.
Oh, we've got dead silence here. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, we'll move on to the next item. Mr. Rayborn?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. And again, Craig Rayborn for the record. And I'll just say about that previous item, we knew that that kind of an agenda item can be a challenge for people to be able to respond to in an open meeting setting like this. And so again, just emphasizing what Ray said and what you said, Vice Chair. If anyone has thoughts or comments about these items as we after the meeting, please feel free to reach out directly to Ray or to myself, or to enter that your comments or thoughts into that Google form that was distributed to the committee members and I think alternates as well. So with that, our next agenda item is to discuss future agenda items. So we always seek guidance from the steering committee on future agenda items to keep the meetings of the committee engaging and informational. And we seek direction on future agenda items that would help us further advance the implementation of the regional plan.
Does anybody have any thoughts or suggestions?
Madam Vice Chair, this is Craig again. Just for the record too, just so everyone understands, we understand this is a very fluid time with a lot of these activities. And so as you can probably all tell, we're gearing up to be in a lot of communication with the steering committee members. And we think probably from that process too, we will be able to identify future agenda items as well. So if folks don't have anything, that's totally fine too. We'll be in plenty of communication, make sure that the next meeting is also chock-a-block full of lots of good content.
Thank you, Mr. Rayburn. So it appears there's no more questions or comments on this item. We can move on to the next item.
Again, thank you. Again, Craig Rayborn. This is the last item on your agenda, and that is final citizens participation.
This is the second time set aside for public comment. Just a reminder that comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any comments?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Eileen Pastor for the record, and there are no additional comments.
Thank you. And if there are no additional comments from any members, I will close the item and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eileen, can we keep the meeting open just for a few minutes for anyone to enter chats if they're still on?
Yep, absolutely. I've got it open.